Welcome to the Short Funk Podcast. I'm Tom Barbley, and today a listener-submitted question. This question comes from Bob Mottram, long-time Noble Ape developer, long-time supporter of a variety of my podcasts, but not yet Model Rail Radio. Given time, perhaps. Bob submitted the topic, the imaginary nature of nation-states. My perspective with regards to nation-states are very simple. I don't think really they serve any functional purpose. I think people argue that they serve a functional purpose. But when you cross the boundaries of nation-states, you are reminded that people believe nation-states are very important, primarily those who are employed to enforce the boundaries of said nation-states. In terms of the internet, in terms of a wide variety of phenomena, they traverse nation-states, and my perspective is sometime in the foreseeable future, as have happened recently, in Iraq and Syria, groups of people have gotten together and said these boundaries are just ridiculous and bulldozed them and led open paths. And concerningly, these folks are bombed for their views associated with nation-states. So my perspective is that passive resistance associated with nation-states is probably the way to go. Or at least that's a way that I am adopting associated with dealing with the concepts of nation-states. With the view that there's a certain expense, a certain degree of nonsense, a certain degree of implicit problems, and as a multi-country migrant, my feeling is the hassles that are created currently in order to move between nation-states, in order to seek migrancy, it does affect a certain group of people. It affects people that basically have no means. It affects people that don't have skills that would enable them to traverse nation-states easily. But also, you find concepts like illegal migration, which occurs, and eventually the political power of these illegal migrants actually takes on some weight, which is where it gets particularly curious. My perspective is the more stuff that's electronic, the more stuff that's communicated internationally, the more folks who grow up in these environments, the less ideas of a previous generation, of a previous time, like nationalism, will hold importance, and progressively people will just be people. Strangely, historically, really, the concept of nation-states as they exist currently are relatively modern ideas. Certainly prior to the Second World War, few people needed passports, those that wanted to travel travelled, and even after the Second World War, for large periods of time, due to migrating populations, there were ways that folk moved into nations, left nations, and the boundaries of nation-states really are a modern idea. In this context, my perspective is that the cost, the time, the energy, all the kinds of nonsense that lets us talk about the boundaries of nation-states. It's costly, it's time-consuming, and it creates a wide variety of brutality that I think the majority of populations are more and more tired of as these things continue. What does a world without nation-states look like? Well, it could be little fiefdoms, it could be community areas, but we really need to discard nationalism, and we need to look at countries that have successfully discarded nationalism, at least for certain periods of time. And usually these are defeated countries. It's a kind of acknowledgement associated with what had gone on previously, with military and nationalism, all this kind of nonsense. But given time, given the circumstances, I think nationhood and nationalism will become just as passé as slavery, indentured servitude, a wide variety of other concepts. So I'm optimistic in the long term that these things will resolve themselves. In the short term, people are going to be nationalistic, people are going to hang on to these historical beliefs. But my perspective as a student of history is that the more you learn about history, the more you learn about nationalism, the more you learn about all these kinds of concepts, the less likely you are to support nation-states. A little footnote to this. When I was in Portland, I met with a fellow whose friend is part of a political movement associated with changing the course of a variety of US historical events, in large part to strengthen nationalism, to strengthen notions of national pride in the US, and through this process, the histories of the Civil War and the Vietnam War, and to a certain extent even the Second World War, are being actively rewritten. This is something, particularly as an owner of books, an owner of a wide variety of books that give clear indications associated with what happened to nation states in certain circumstances, and in particular, the many twists and turns and unadulterated curiosities that countries like the US, particularly when they engage in conflict, offer. The dominant narrative currently is the US was attacked, unprovoked, by the Japanese in Pearl Harbor, but those of us with history books actually know about the American fuel embargo and the wide variety of Axis and Allied dealings that led forwards towards Pearl Harbor, and the fact that the US, while trying to remain neutral, did actually enact certain degrees of harm on Japan. It wasn't just a one-sided thing. However, increasingly the history is that the US was attacked unprovoked. Increasingly, the history is that the Civil War was all about slavery and the South lost, thankfully. The right, North won. And in particular, something that I find very curious, that the US didn't in fact lose the Vietnam War. These are now becoming the dominant narratives in the US, particularly associated with history and the teaching of history. And I think nationalism through these kind of things indicates clearly how fragile it is as a concept. Why would you need to change a historical perspective if nationalism was going to survive for the foreseeable future? You need to lie, you need to change things, you need to do all these manipulations in order to allow for the nature of nation-states in the foreseeable future. Slowly but surely, as the costs grow associated with these aspects of curious nationalism and the countless wars that need to be fought in order to be right are dismissed by a population that grows weary, the concept of nation-states, I think, will eventually erode as well. Let's do our own little bit in the people that we know and those that we talk to, in the lives that we lead, to erode the nation-state until it no longer exists in the form that it is currently. Tom Barbalet in San Jose, signing out.